Welcome to Reveal Fears. Subscribe and like this video.
Part 1. The opening scene. Detective Adrian Stone adjusted the brim of his hat as he crouched near the crime scene, the pale glow of streetlights casting fractured shadows across the alley. The wind carried the metallic scent of rain, and something far more sinister, blood. The scene was unlike anything Stone had encountered in his 20 years on the force. The body lay sprawled among the garbage bags, the victim's left hand extended as though reaching for something. That something was a single white glove, meticulously placed, its fabric pristine despite the squalor around it. Stone's sharp eyes caught the detail immediately. Gloves didn't belong in scenes like this. He turned to the forensics tech. "Bag that carefully. It's staged." The tech nodded, and Stone stepped back, letting the eerie stillness sink into his skin. This wasn't just a murder. It was a message. As the squad combed the area for evidence, Stone's partner, Detective Maria Vega, approached, her face pale. "You're not going to like this, Adrian." "What is it?" She handed him an envelope sealed with red wax, an ornate monogram etched into its surface. The initials were unfamiliar, but the precision of the craftsmanship sent chills down his spine. He tore it open, revealing a single sheet of paper, the handwriting elegant and deliberate. "The game begins. Find me before I finish what I started." Stone's pulse quickened as he stared at the note. "Someone wanted us to find this," Vega murmured. Stone nodded grimly. His mind was already racing, piecing together the possibilities. The glove. The letter. The stage scene. 5 names came to mind, each capable of something like this, each with a connection to Stone that he couldn't ignore. Elliot Grayson, a disgraced surgeon with a penchant for revenge. Rachel Lane, the estranged daughter of a mob boss with secrets to hide. Peter Crow, a crime scene photographer with a fascination for the macabre. Vivian Hart, a celebrated defense attorney whose victories often came with questionable morality. Samuel, Sam Barris, a former cop-turned-PI with a long history of grudges. Stone stuffed the note into his coat pocket. Whoever this was, they weren't finished. And neither was he. Part 2. Shadows of Suspects. The precinct was quiet for the hour, but Detective Stone's mind was anything but. The crime board in the briefing room flickered under the fluorescent lights, filled with photos of the crime scene, pin maps, and hastily scribbled notes. At its center was the glove, its pristine white fabric now glaringly out of place in the chaos of the board. Detective Vega leaned against the table, arms crossed. "Whoever did this knows you, Adrian. That letter wasn't generic. It was personal." Stone studied the board, his jaw tightening. "I've got a shortlist." Vega arched an eyebrow. "Already?" He nodded and started pacing. "Elliot Grayson. He's been under my skin since I worked the Malvern case. I testified against him. He lost everything. This reeks of his attention to detail. And his ability to stage something grotesque," Vega added. Stone tapped the next photo pinned to the board, a news clipping showing Rachel Lane walking out of court, her father in the background. "Rachel Lane's got motive. Her old man's trial left her exposed. She blamed me for leaking details about her shady side deals, but I wasn't even the one who did it. She's slippery," Vega admitted. "But this feels, I don't know, too calculated?" Stone grunted, pointing at a glossy black and white shot of Peter Crow behind his camera. "Crow's obsession with crime scenes borders on fetishistic. He's been harassing me for months about exclusive access to my investigations. If anyone sees death as art, it's him." He stepped back, his gaze darkening as he fixed it on the next name. Vivian Hart's perfectly polished face stared back from a publicity still, her courtroom reputation practically oozing off the page. "Hart's a wild card. She's defended some of the worst scum and walked them right out of the courtroom. She's made threats about exposing me more than once. Wouldn't put it past her to escalate this time." "And Barris?" Vega asked. Stone paused, his hand lingering over the picture of the rugged PI. Samuel Barris' gaze seemed to follow him even from the board. Sam used to be a good cop. Then the badge became a tool for his ego. I turned him in when internal affairs came sniffing. He swore I'd pay for what he called a betrayal. Vega exhaled. That's a hell of a list, Adrian. Any one of them could have planted that glove and written that letter. Stone turned back to the table and picked up the evidence bag containing the glove. His fingers itched to open it, but protocol wouldn't allow it. Here's the thing, he said slowly. The glove, it's meant to distract us. But I keep thinking about that letter. Find me before I finish what I started. It means this isn't over. What's your move? Vega asked. I talked to them. Stone replied, his voice firm. All of them. Part 3, the first interrogation. Detective Stone's unmarked car rolled to a stop in front of a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of the city. The faded sign read The Hollow Tap, a haunt frequented by Samuel Barris. Stone had spent many nights tailing suspects to places like this, dark corners where regret and bad decisions brewed. Tonight, though, he wasn't tailing anyone. He was walking into the lion's den. Inside, the air was thick with stale beer and smoke, the jukebox crooning a country ballad. Stone's eyes adjusted quickly to the dim light, scanning for Barris. It didn't take long. The man was hunched over a glass of bourbon at the far end of the bar, his broad shoulders still imposing despite years of decline. Barris, Stone said as he slid onto the stool beside him. Barris didn't look up. Stone. To what do I owe this pleasure? His voice was gravelly, worn down by years of shouting and whiskey. Stone gestured to the bartender for a coffee. Got a situation. Thought you might know something about it. Barris chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Let me guess, you're here because someone's made your life miserable. Well, join the club. We've got jackets. Let's cut the crap. Stone snapped, leaning in closer. A man was killed last night, and the scene was theatrical. A message left for me, and your name's on my shortlist. Barris finally turned, his bloodshot eyes locking onto Stone's. You think I've got time to stage a murder? I've got enough problems keeping my head above water. That so? Stone leaned back, sizing him up. Funny thing, this victim had ties to the Varden case. You remember that one, don't you? The case that cost you your badge? Barris's jaw tightened, and his hand gripped the glass until his knuckles whitened. You want to tread carefully, Adrian. That case didn't cost me my badge, you did. You're deflecting, Stone said coldly. The question is, did you kill him to send a message? Or are you working with someone else to settle old scores? Barris stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The bar's patrons turned to glance but quickly went back to their drinks, sensing the tension. You've got nerve, I'll give you that, Barris growled. But I'm not your guy. Yeah, I've got plenty of reasons to hate you, Stone, but murder? That's not my style. Stone stood too, keeping his composure. Then why don't you tell me where you were last night, and we'll see if it checks out. I was here, Barris said, gesturing to the bartender. Ask him. I closed the place down. The bartender nodded from behind the counter. Yeah, he was here. Drunk off his ass, same as most nights. Stone stared at Barris, his instincts firing on all cylinders. If you're lying, I'll find out. Barris leaned in, his voice low and venomous. Good luck, detective. But if someone's messing with you, maybe you should take a long look in the mirror. You've made a lot of enemies. As Stone left the bar, his phone buzzed. He answered, Vega's voice sharp on the other end. We've got another one, Adrian. Same setup. Another glove, another note. Stone's stomach churned. He was already behind. Part 4, the second scene. The crime scene was a hollowed-out office building, its skeletal remains a monument to halted construction. Stone's shoes crunched over shattered glass as he entered, the faint hum of fluorescent lights casting a sickly green hue over the scene. Vega was already inside, her face set in a grim mask. Who called it in? Stone asked as he stepped over the police tape. Construction foreman, Vega replied. He showed up early to check supplies, found the body on the third floor. Same setup, Adrian, glove placed just so, and a note. It's addressed to you again. Stone followed her up the narrow stairwell, his pulse pounding. When they reached the third floor, he saw the scene. The body lay sprawled on the dusty concrete, a pool of blood spreading out like spilled ink. The glove was perched delicately on the victim's chest, and the note sat beside it, pinned to the floor with a jagged piece of rebar. The victim was a man in his late 20s, well-dressed but with an air of desperation, a foreclosure specialist, judging by the scattered papers near his body. Victim's ID matches a Mark Reno, Vega said. Works for Hathaway Lending. Looks like he was here to assess the property for repossession. Stone crouched near the note, careful not to touch it. The handwriting was the same elegant script as before. Strike 2. The clock's ticking, Detective. Stone stood, his eyes scanning the room. The staging was identical, down to the perfect placement of the glove. Yet something was different. He couldn't put his finger on it until his gaze fell on a security camera mounted near the ceiling. Tell me that thing works, Stone said, nodding at the camera. Vega followed his gaze and grabbed her radio. Uniforms are already on it. They're pulling footage now. As they waited, Stone studied the glove. It was slightly smaller than the one from the first scene, and the fabric was different, silk instead of cotton. A subtle change, but deliberate. Adrian, Vega called, her voice tinged with urgency. You're going to want to see this. She led him to a squad car parked outside, where a young officer was hunched over a laptop. The grainy footage on the screen showed the office building's entrance from the previous night. At 10:47 p.m., a figure appeared, cloaked in shadow and wearing a long coat. They moved with precision, entering the building and disappearing inside. Do we have a face? Stone asked, leaning closer. The officer shook his head. Not yet, but we're working on enhancing the footage. They never looked directly at the camera. Damn it, Stone muttered. He straightened, his mind racing. The killer was escalating, leaving a trail but staying just out of reach. Vega stepped closer, lowering her voice. This feels bigger than revenge, Adrian. It's like they're playing with you. Stone's phone buzzed again. He didn't recognize the number but answered anyway. A distorted voice crackled through the line. Having fun yet, Detective? Tick-tock. The line went dead before Stone could respond. Part 5. A second suspect. Stone's jaw tightened as he drove toward the sleek high-rise where Rachel Lane kept her office. It was a far cry from the dingy bar he'd visited earlier. Lane had money, connections, and an ironclad veneer of respectability. Still, Stone knew better than to trust appearances. Rachel Lane had the means, the motive, and the intelligence to orchestrate something as meticulous as the staged murders. And if the killer's cryptic call was meant to rattle him, Stone wasn't about to let it show. The receptionist barely looked up as Stone pushed through the glass doors and marched into Lane's law office. He spotted her in a corner conference room, her sharp, tailored suit offset by her cold, calculating eyes. She saw him and smirked, as if she'd been expecting him. Detective Stone, Lane said as he entered. To what do I owe the pleasure? Another baseless accusation, or are you just here to ruin my day? Cut the act, Lane, Stone said, shutting the door behind him. 2 bodies in 2 days, both linked to my old cases. Care to explain where you were last night? Her smirk widened. I don't answer to you, Detective. You do if I think you're involved in a murder investigation. Lane leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs. You always did have a flair for the dramatic. Let me save you some time. I was at a charity gala until midnight. Plenty of witnesses can confirm it. Stone's eyes narrowed. Convenient. You're good at covering your tracks. And you're predictable. Lane shot back. Dragging me into your latest disaster because you can't handle the pressure. Tell me, Adrian, how many people have you alienated over the years? How many would like to see you squirm? That's not an answer, Stone said coldly. The victim from the second scene worked for Hathaway Lending. They foreclosed on some of your father's properties after his death, didn't they? Lane's smile faltered, but only for a moment. You're reaching. Am I? Stone pressed. Because the glove found at the scene, it's the kind used in high-end events. Silk Lane. Just like the ones your staff wears at those galas you love so much. Lane's eyes flashed with anger, but her voice remained calm. If you think you can pin this on me, you're welcome to try. But I'll warn you, Adrian, you'll lose. Stone studied her for a long moment, his instincts gnawing at him. Lane was a master manipulator, but was she capable of murder? She thrived on control, and these killings felt personal, almost intimate. It wasn't her style, or at least it hadn't been. Before he could press further, his phone buzzed. Vega's number lit up the screen. What now? He answered. We've got something from the security footage, Vega said. It's not a face, but the coat the suspect was wearing. It matches a designer brand. And? They only sell them at one store downtown. We're pulling purchase records now. Stone hung up and glanced at Lane. You're not off the hook yet. As he turned to leave, Lane called after him. Be careful out there, detective. The closer you get to the truth, the more dangerous this game will become. Stone didn't respond, but her words lingered as he stepped into the elevator. The deeper he went, the more the pieces didn't add up, and the more certain he became that the killer wasn't finished. Part 6. The Designer Coat. Back at the precinct, Detective Vega met Stone in the briefing room, her expression a mix of determination and unease. On the table before her was a high-resolution still from the security footage, highlighting the suspect's long, dark coat. A smaller image inset in the corner showed a matching coat on a retail website, its sleek design and distinctive stitching unmistakable. It's a limited-run piece, Vega said, pointing to the inset. Only 20 of them sold in the past 6 months, all from a boutique downtown. I called the manager. He's sending over the list of buyers. Stone leaned over the table, his eyes narrowing at the screen. Expensive taste. Fits the profile of someone who wants to be seen as sophisticated, even when they're committing murder. Or it's a false lead, Vega countered. Someone trying to throw us off. Stone's phone buzzed. A text. It was from the boutique's manager. List sent to your email. Let me know if you need anything else. Stone pulled up the list on his phone. The names were a mix of upper-class professionals and socialites, but one name leapt out at him, Peter Crow. Stone straightened, holding the phone toward Vega. Crow bought one of the coats. Vega frowned. The crime scene photographer? You think he's involved? I think he's obsessed with the macabre and likes to be where the action is, Stone replied. And now we know he's got the wardrobe for it. Stone grabbed his coat. Let's pay Crow a visit. Later that night, Peter Crow's apartment. Stone and Vega stood outside Crow's door, the faint hum of city noise barely audible in the hallway. Stone knocked sharply. Crow! It's Detective Stone. After a long pause, footsteps approached. The door opened a crack, revealing Crow's wiry frame and wide, bloodshot eyes. He smirked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Detective. To what do I owe the pleasure? We have questions, Stone said, pushing the door open further. Crow didn't resist, stepping aside and gesturing them in with an exaggerated flourish. By all means, Crow said. Welcome to my humble abode. The apartment was as chaotic as Crow himself. Photographs of crime scenes covered the walls, some pinned haphazardly, others framed like fine art. A stack of camera equipment cluttered the floor, alongside empty coffee cups and half-filled notebooks. Stone wasted no time. Where were you the past 2 nights, Crow? Crow raised an eyebrow. Am I a suspect now? Should I call my lawyer? Stone stepped closer, his voice cold. You own one of those coats. The same one our suspect was wearing when they killed Mark Reno. Crow's smirk faded. So? It's a nice coat. Doesn't mean I've been out murdering people. Then you won't mind proving your alibi, Vega said, crossing her arms. Crow hesitated, glancing toward his camera equipment. I was working. Editing photos for a client. Client name? Stone demanded. Crow licked his lips, his confidence slipping. It's private work. Confidential. Stone exchanged a glance with Vega. Confidential work, but not confidential enough to keep you from wearing a coat that ties you to 2 murders? Crow bristled, stepping back toward his desk. You're barking up the wrong tree, detective. I'm an artist, not a killer. Artists don't usually leave taunting notes for cops. Vega shot back. Want to explain why the killer seems to know so much about Stone's past? Crow's hands twitched, his gaze darting to the door. I don't know what you're talking about. Before Stone could press further, his phone buzzed again. Another text. Third gloves in place. You're running out of time. Stone's blood ran cold as he read the message, the taunting words dragging him further into the killer's game. Part 7, the third scene. Stone and Vega stormed out of Crow's apartment, leaving the photographer pale and stammering in their wake. Crow's insistence on innocence had felt thin, but the taunting text pulled their attention elsewhere. The killer was always a step ahead. Third glove, Vega muttered, gripping the dashboard as Stone sped through the city. They're escalating faster. This is more than revenge, it's a game to them. Stone didn't respond, his jaw clenched as the car tore through the damp streets. A few minutes later, they arrived at an abandoned theater on the edge of town. The marquee, half broken and faded, read "Coming soon," a promise that had gone unfulfilled for decades. Uniformed officers waved them inside. The smell of mildew and decay greeted them, the air thick with an uneasy stillness. Stone's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating rows of moth-eaten seats and a dilapidated stage. It's on the stage, one of the officers said, his voice barely above a whisper. Stone approached, his heart pounding. The body was arranged theatrically, propped upright in a chair at the center of the stage, its head tilted as if mid-performance. Blood dripped down onto the floorboards, pooling in the spotlight's eerie glow. The glove was there, placed in the victim's lap like a final bow. A note, folded neatly, sat beneath it. Stone snatched the note, the words twisting his stomach. Your audience awaits, detective. The finale is near. Vega stepped up beside him, her face pale. Do we know who the victim is? The officer nodded grimly. Paul Kendrick. He's in your files, detective. Stone's breath caught. Kendrick was a former suspect from a case that had haunted him, a robbery gone wrong, a suspect released on technicalities. Stone had always suspected Kendrick of more, but the evidence had never been enough. It's a pattern, Stone said, his voice low. Each victim is tied to a case from my past. Someone's sending a message. But why now? Vega crouched near the glove, studying its placement. It's like they're taunting you, pulling you into their world. The question is, what's the endgame? Stone's phone buzzed again. Another text, simple but chilling. Not all stories have a happy ending. His hands tightened around the phone as dread settled over him. The killer wasn't just targeting his cases, they were targeting him. Part 8, Connecting the Cases. Back at the precinct, Stone and Vega stood before the case board, the 3 crime scenes now marked with grim precision. Strings of red yarn connected the victims to past investigations, and at the center of it all was a photo of Stone himself, pinned like a target. All 3 victims. Vega began, tracing a line with her finger. The surgeon, the lender, and now Kendrick, they're all linked to cases where your decisions played a pivotal role. Either as suspects, witnesses, or collateral damage. Stone rubbed his temples, exhaustion gnawing at him. This isn't just about my career, Maria. It's about me. Someone wants me to relive these cases, to see them unravel in blood. Vega nodded, her eyes narrowing at the chaotic web of evidence. Let's break it down. First victim, Elliot Grayson. You testified against him. He went to prison, lost everything. Someone could see that as a grudge worth carrying. Then there's Mark Reno. Stone added. Hathaway lending foreclosed on properties tied to Rachel Lane's father. Lane blamed me for exposing her family's dealings during her father's trial. And Kendrick, Vega said, pausing. You never closed his case. The evidence fell apart. Maybe someone thought justice wasn't served and wanted to send a message. Stone stared at the board, a nagging thought gnawing at the edges of his mind. It's not just about revenge. This is meticulous. The killer knows the details of these cases intimately, things that weren't public knowledge. An insider? Vega asked. Stone nodded grimly. Or someone who had access to my files. The room fell silent as the implications settled over them. Vega broke it with a sharp breath. What about the suspects we've interrogated? Lane, Crow, Barris, any of them have the knowledge or connections to pull this off? Stone's mind raced. Barris had the history and the grudge, but not the finesse. Lane had the intelligence and motive, but her alibi was solid. Crow's fascination with death fit the killer's theatrics, but he'd seemed more opportunistic than methodical. It's almost like they're all pawns. Stone muttered. Someone pulling strings from the shadows. Before Vega could respond, an officer burst into the room, his face pale. Detectives, you need to see this. The killer's personal strike. They followed the officer to the bullpen, where a laptop sat open on a desk. A video was paused on the screen, its grainy footage showing Stone's home. This was sent to us anonymously, the officer said, his voice shaky. Time-stamped an hour ago. Stone stepped closer, his stomach tightening as the video played. It showed his living room, the camera panning slowly over family photos and personal effects. His chest tightened as the view settled on a note taped to his refrigerator. The camera zoomed in, and Stone could just make out the words. Tick-tock, Adrian. Your time is almost up. The video cut to black. Vega's hand flew to her mouth. Adrian, they've been in your house. Stone's fist clenched as he turned away, his mind a storm of rage and fear. The killer wasn't just playing a game anymore, they were making it personal. Part 9, striking close to home. Stone's car roared down the city streets toward his house, Vega riding silently beside him. The fear gnawing at him was unlike anything he'd felt before. It wasn't about the cases or the killer's game, it was about what he might find when he walked through his own front door. He skidded into his driveway, the tires screeching. The porch light flickered, casting eerie shadows across the lawn. Stone drew his gun as he approached the front door, motioning for Vega to follow. The door was unlocked. Stay behind me, he whispered. Inside, the house was silent, but something was wrong. The air felt heavy, oppressive. Stone moved room by room, clearing the spaces methodically. The killer was gone, but their presence lingered like a bad memory. In the kitchen, Stone froze. The note from the video was still taped to the refrigerator, the elegant handwriting as deliberate and mocking as ever. Tick-tock, Adrian. Your time is almost up. Vega stepped in behind him, her face pale. This isn't just about scaring you. They're embedding themselves in your life. Stone pulled the note free, his fingers trembling despite his steady exterior. They know too much. My cases, my home. This isn't just research, it's obsession. A loud crash from the living room snapped both their heads around. Stone led the way, gun raised, his pulse hammering. The sound came from the bookshelf, where a family photo lay shattered on the floor. Stone picked it up, his jaw tightening as he saw what the killer had left beneath the broken glass, a single silk glove. Unraveling the web. An hour later, back at the precinct, Stone's home was crawling with forensics teams. Vega watched him from across the room as he stared at the glove in its evidence bag, his expression unreadable. Adrian, she said softly, approaching him. They're pushing you. They want you to crack. Stone shook his head. This isn't about cracking. It's about control. They're showing me that they're one step ahead, always watching. Vega pulled up a chair beside him. Then let's take back control. We've got the coat lead, the glove, the timing, there's a connection here. We're just not seeing it yet. Stone leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Each suspect, Barris, Lane, Crow, they're all tied to the cases. But what if the killer's using them as misdirection? You think the killer's someone we haven't considered? Vega asked. Maybe, Stone said. Or maybe it's someone we've overlooked because they don't fit the profile. Someone who knows me better than anyone else. Vega's eyes widened. You're saying it's personal on both sides? Stone nodded slowly. Someone who knows my cases, my life, my patterns. This isn't random. It's methodical. A knock on the door interrupted them. An officer stepped in, holding a folder. Detectives, we just got a hit on the designer coat purchase. You're not going to believe this. Stone took the folder, his brow furrowing as he flipped through it. At the bottom of the list, under the buyer information, was a name that made his blood run cold: Vivian Hart. Why would Hart buy that coat? Vega asked, leaning over his shoulder. Stone closed the folder, his jaw tightening. There's only one way to find out. Part 10. The Interrogation. Vivian Hart's office was as sleek and unyielding as its owner. Glass walls framed the city skyline, and every surface gleamed with meticulous order. Stone and Vega were ushered in by Hart's assistant, who looked frazzled despite the pristine surroundings. Vivian Hart rose as they entered, her sharp features framed by her perfectly tailored suit. Her expression was a mask of professional disinterest, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of annoyance. Detectives, she said smoothly. I assume you're here for more baseless accusations? Save it, Stone said, tossing the folder onto her desk. You bought the coat. Hart's eyebrows arched slightly. Coat? You'll have to be more specific. My wardrobe is quite extensive. Stone stepped closer, his voice cold. The designer coat worn by a murderer in at least 2 homicides. Your name's on the purchase record. Hart's gaze flickered to the folder, but her composure remained intact. And? Owning a coat isn't a crime, detective. Nor is it proof of anything. You're not just a name on a receipt. Vega interjected. You've defended suspects in Stone's cases before. You've made threats, pushed boundaries. You've got the connections and the resources to orchestrate this whole thing. Hart smirked, leaning back in her chair. You give me too much credit. I don't need theatrics to make my point. And if I were going to kill someone, I assure you, I wouldn't leave such obvious breadcrumbs. Stone slammed his hand on the desk, the sharp sound echoing in the room. Enough games, Hart. Someone's using that coat, and your name's tied to it. If it's not you, then who? Hart's smile faded, and she leaned forward, her voice icy. Let me spell it out for you, detective. If you think this is enough to accuse me, arrest me. Otherwise, I suggest you find the real killer before they decide to target someone closer to you. Stone froze, her words striking a nerve. Hart's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before she sat back, her confidence fully restored. If we're done here, I have clients waiting. Vega tugged at Stone's sleeve, pulling him toward the door. He didn't speak as they left the office, but his mind churned. Hart was hiding something, he could feel it. A major twist. As they walked back to the car, Stone's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his heart skipping a beat at the text. Did you like her performance? Let's see how you handle the next act. You know where to find it. Stone showed Vega the message, his pulse pounding. They're pushing us to another scene. Vega frowned. Or luring us into a trap. We don't have a choice, Stone said, climbing into the driver's seat. They've been ahead of us at every turn. It's time we catch them in the act. The GPS coordinates from the message led them to a desolate warehouse on the edge of the industrial district. The building loomed in the foggy night, its broken windows like empty eyes staring back at them. Stone and Vega drew their weapons, the silence inside the warehouse broken only by the sound of dripping water. In the center of the cavernous space was a single chair, and on it sat another note. Stone grabbed it, his hands trembling as he read. The final act is yours, detective. But will you like what you see in the mirror? From the shadows, a figure stepped forward. They were cloaked in darkness, but the voice that followed was unmistakable, calm, deliberate, and horribly familiar. Hello, Adrian. Stone's gun wavered as he stared into the eyes of someone he never expected. Part 11. The Revelation. The figure stepped into the faint light leaking from a shattered window. The shadows peeled away, revealing the face Stone had never imagined would haunt him in this way. "Maria?" he whispered, lowering his gun an inch. Detective Maria Vega stood before him, her expression calm, almost serene. Her weapon was holstered, but the glint in her eyes was anything but benign. "You weren't supposed to figure it out yet," Vega said softly, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "But I guess you always were good at running the script." Stone's grip tightened on his weapon. "This is a joke, right? Tell me this is some kind of goddamn undercover operation." "No joke, Adrian," she replied, stepping closer. "Every scene, every clue, I crafted it for you. To make you see." "See what?" Stone snapped, his voice raw with disbelief. "You killed them? For what? Some twisted game?" Vega tilted her head, a faint smile curling her lips. "You've built your life on the wreckage of others, Adrian. Every choice you made, every case you solved, it came with a cost. Grayson, Reno, Kendrick, they were just the beginning." Stone's mind raced, piecing together the fragments that had eluded him. Vega had been his partner for years, someone he trusted implicitly. She'd been there for the victories and the failures, the moments that defined his career. And now she stood before him as the orchestrator of his worst nightmare. "Why?" Stone demanded, his voice breaking. "Because someone had to hold you accountable," Vega said, her calm unraveling into quiet rage. "You think you're the hero, Adrian, but you're just as complicit in their destruction as I am now." Stone shook his head, his heart pounding. "You don't get to play judge and executioner. You've crossed the line, there's no coming back from this." Vega's smile returned, colder than ever. "You say that like I care." Before Stone could respond, a faint creak echoed through the warehouse. Both of them turned toward the sound, their weapons raised. From the shadows emerged a second figure, their face obscured by a hood. "What the hell?" Stone muttered, his focus split. The hooded figure stepped forward, dropping something metallic onto the floor, a recorder. It clicked on, playing Vega's voice. "Because someone had to hold you accountable. You think you're the hero, Adrian, but you're just as complicit." Stone turned back to Vega, her expression shifting from triumph to shock. "Who is that?" she hissed, her composure cracking. The hooded figure pulled back the hood, revealing none other than Peter Crow, the crime scene photographer. His grin was feral as he held up his camera. "Smile for the camera, Detective. Or should I say, former Detective Vega?" Part 12, The Final Confrontation. The air inside the warehouse felt electric, every breath sharp and heavy. Stone's gun stayed locked on Vega, but his attention shifted to Crow, whose camera hung around his neck like a talisman. "Crow," Stone growled. "What the hell are you doing here?" Crow shrugged, his grin never wavering. "Just documenting a masterpiece, Detective. Vega's show has been captivating, but every production needs a final twist, doesn't it?" Vega's composure cracked further, her hand twitching near her holster. "You've been following me?" "Of course I have," Crow said, his voice smooth. "You think you're the only one who can appreciate a good narrative? I've been shadowing your little game from the start. The gloves, the notes, the theatrics, it's all so predictable. But you didn't account for one thing." Vega's eyes narrowed. "And what's that?" Crow's grin widened as he raised his camera. "Me." The observer becomes the storyteller. The flash of his camera lit the warehouse like lightning, and in that split second Vega moved. Her hand darted to her weapon, but Stone was faster. His shot rang out, the deafening crack ricocheting through the empty space. Vega staggered, her gun clattering to the ground as she dropped to her knees. Stone approached cautiously, his gun still trained on her. "You didn't have to end it like this," Stone said, his voice a mix of anger and sorrow. "You could have walked away." Vega coughed, blood staining her lips as she looked up at him with weary eyes. "Walked away? No, Adrian. You don't just walk away from justice." Crow clapped slowly, his mocking applause filling the silence. "What a performance. Bravo, really. But you've left me with the finale, Detective Stone." Stone turned toward Crow, his gun now aimed squarely at the photographer. "You're done here, Crow. Whatever game you're playing, it's over." Crow laughed, pulling out a flash drive from his pocket. "This isn't a game, Stone. This is art. Every photo, every note, every drop of blood, it's all part of the bigger picture. And this little drive? It's the story of your life. Your failures, your compromises, your victims. It's all here." Stone's finger hovered over the trigger, but he hesitated. "Why, Crow? Why get involved in this madness?" "Because madness deserves an audience," Crow replied, his grin fading into something darker. "And you, detective, have been the star all along." Stone's grip tightened. "Drop the drive. Now." Crow smirked and threw the flash drive toward Stone, who caught it instinctively. At the same moment, Crow darted into the shadows, disappearing into the maze of the warehouse. "Crow!" Stone shouted, his voice echoing. But the photographer was gone. Stone turned back to Vega, but she was slumped forward, her breathing shallow. He knelt beside her, the weight of the night pressing down on him. "It was never just about the cases," Vega whispered, her voice weak. "It was about you, Adrian. About making you see." Stone didn't respond. He stared at the flash drive in his hand, knowing it held answers he might never be ready for. Epilogue. Weeks later, Stone sat alone in his apartment, the drive plugged into his laptop. The screen was filled with folders, each one meticulously labeled with names, dates, and case numbers. It was a grim chronicle of his career, compiled by Vega and twisted by Crow's voyeuristic obsession. He didn't press play. Instead, he closed the laptop and leaned back, the weight of guilt and loss settling in his chest. The killer was gone, but the scars they'd left behind would linger. The final act wasn't about Vega or Crow. It was about Stone, and whether he could live with the man he saw in the mirror. The curtain had fallen, but the echoes of the performance would haunt him forever.
Thanks for listening. Subscribe, like, and don't miss the next scary stories. Bye-bye.